Well, it says we're live, so I'm going to trust that we're live.
Yeah.
Hello. Hi, everybody.
So,
hello.
Thank you so much for taking this time with us and sharing. I absolutely loved when you first went live and started, sharing your story and your testimony, and when you talked about identity abuse. And it's one of those things you're like, oh my gosh, that makes total sense. And you just gave language to what I didn't have language for. And that was just profound to me. And especially since we're a group that's so much about identity and empowerment and stuff like that, I'm like, oh my gosh, this could so be a key for so many people's breakthrough. So you are a licensed counselor. Are you LCSW or what?
LMFT.
LMFT. Okay. And a pastor.
Yes. I'm ordained in the Church of the Nazarene. Yeah.
Awesome. So you're a busy lady.
Yes, ma'am.
Do you primarily focus on identity or just pretty much all across the board?
I actually resigned from my associate pastor position and hung up my shingle so that I only do coaching for identity. And
wow.
Yeah.
That's awesome. I love when people find their specialty and it's, not the 10-page menu that you're like, but my favorite is In-N-Out Burger because it's the same thing.
Yes. Oh,
easy menu. So why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself, share your story, and then tell us all about this very intriguing thing called identity abuse.
Awesome. Thank you. And I want to thank you for allowing me to come and share because, again, like you said, I think this is a powerful thing for breakthrough for a lot of people. But I also want to thank Heather and Ray for joining with me. Heather's a longtime friend and long time. Well, in Kingdom World, it's a long time.
Yeah.
I just love her to death. And Ray is a new friend, and I look forward to hearing more about her questions in regards to identity abuse. So I have 4 stories that I'm going to tell. 2 that were real for me, and then 2 that will help you understand identity. And so one of the stories I want to go back to is tell the story that some people may not have seen the post about the time when I was 8 years old.
Yeah.
And my mom called me into the living room. Now, in that era, you were to be seen and not heard. And so when your parents called you, something was wrong, or you had a chore to do or something. And so I go down into the living room, and I could see my mom standing right in the entryway of the door of the living room. But my dad is sitting over on the couch behind the newspaper. And my mom looks down at me and says, "Your brother says that your dad's been touching you. Is that true?" And I'm like, "Yeah." And so she looks over at my dad and says, "Is that true?" And he never looks up from the newspaper, and he says, "I don't know what she's talking about." And so my mom looks down at me, and she's having this conversation. And every time she brought him into the conversation, he would say, "I don't know what she's talking about." And he never looked up from the newspaper. Now, one time he said, "I don't recall what she's talking about." Now, the interesting thing is how clearly I remember this. And I got really mad. And I'm like, "What do you mean you can't recall? It happens all the time. And it happened yesterday." And I remember yelling. And again, yelling was not something that you did to your parents back then. But strangely, the conversation ended. And he never looked up, never moved, and it just ended. But because of my dad's lie, I started believing things about myself that weren't true. And so I believe that when I stand up for myself and genuinely am trying to plead for help, it doesn't matter, which then meant that I don't matter. And what happened out of that was I learned how to just be whoever anybody wanted me to be at the time. And I became a really good people pleaser, a very good follower. And no matter what venue I went into, I would be whoever anybody wanted me to be. Happy, outgoing, somber, serious. I mean, I didn't even know who I was. I gave that away. Mm-hmm. And so that ended up with a lot of mental health issues and social issues. And I became a teenage alcoholic and very promiscuous and ended up doing gobs of therapy. And so it doesn't surprise a lot of people that I became a licensed therapist and an ordained pastor, because I tell people I'm just a high-paid codependent, which means that you all might be codependent. I just get paid for it. So And so I had all these years of therapy, plus I had 11 years of college, and then I had the college to become ordained, and then I practiced professional therapy for 20 years. And I had all this experience, and I'm working with my clients, and they would continually, they genuinely wanted help, but they would get stuck. And over and again, they would just would work really hard, but they would get stuck. So one day I'm just sitting on my couch, and I wasn't genuinely praying. I was just sitting there thinking about these particular clients. I'm like, why? Why? And I heard two words. Guess what they are? Can you guess?
Identity
abuse.
Identity abuse. Okay. And I'm like, identity abuse? What does that mean? And I mean, I'd heard of physical abuse and sexual abuse, and I'm a pretty fast thinker. And I tell people I can think about something for really put my mind to something for about 5 minutes and wrap my mind around it. But I spent 3 days by myself thinking, if my identity that God gave me was abused, what would that do to me? And the epiphany that I had in those days was that every emotional, mental health disorder that people had, aside from the organic ones, could be explained by identity abuse. And I know that there's people who just by hearing those words will get freedom. Mm-hmm. My identity was abused. And so I took that knowledge, I went back to work, and so the first day I went back to staff meeting, and I was at a large church. We had about 18 people on staff, and I'm on the whiteboard going, you guys have to pay attention to what God, and I'm just scribbling all this stuff on the whiteboard, like, you're not going to believe what God showed me, blah, 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 and they're all kind of staring at me going, oh, okay, because it was kind of an odd thing to do at staff meeting where you discuss, programs and stuff. And but one of my friends there texted me afterwards, and she said, thank you so much for sharing that, because it broke off lies that I've been carrying around for a long time. Mm-hmm. And so I started spending time with my clients, and one particular client who was a narcissist, and they say in the psychological professional world that narcissists cannot be healed. And this particular person, flaming narcissist, and I told them, I said, where in your life did the lie that you're not good enough start? And they're like, well, da 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 da. And I'm like, that's a lie, and you don't have to believe it anymore. And that client sat there and cried for 40 minutes nonstop and was freed instantly. Wow. And there's still a lot of behavioral things that come along with that, and lifestyle changes and that kind of thing. But the mental and the spiritual freedom that comes out of just understanding this concept is like fire. It's just like fire. And so what I did was I created a program called Identity Abuse Busters, because I thought, if I can take all this knowledge and compress it over time. So some people go to therapy for forever and a day. I went to the same therapist for 13 years. And one day I woke up and I'm like, why am I doing this anymore? And so I thought, if I can take all this knowledge that people need to understand this and just compress it into a program. And so that's what I did. So it has three overarching themes. The first one is you do have an identity that's designed by God. It's valuable, and you can discover it. That's the first one. The second one is evil always lies. Always. And you have to just know that evil always lies. And then the third is you can choose to believe truth, even if it doesn't feel true. And that's where I spend a lot of my time, is helping people move through the concepts of what is true versus what feels true. And so so I want to go back to the first one, identity. You do have an identity. So I'm going to tell the story. So I have told the story to Heather. I don't know. So I'll let me see. I'll tell it to Melissa, and then Ray, you and I can get together sometime. I can tell it to you. So I'm going to tell you the story. Well, let me retract this. I'm sorry. I need to be tuned into the audience as well. So I'm going to, what am I going to do? I will tell it to Melissa, but I want everybody who's listening to pay attention as though I'm speaking it to you. And it's really important that you hear the tone and the reality and the truths behind what I'm saying. Okay, so I'm going to tell you the story about the day that God made Melissa. So the only thing is that when you hear this, you have to sit and receive, and you can't talk or respond. Okay. So there was a day that the God who made the mountains and the oceans and everything beautiful stopped everything he was doing. And he said, I'm going to make a Melissa. And he took the cells of your body and he swirled them in his hand, and he thought about the color of your eyes and the color of your hair and the shape of your toes. And he was so excited. He goes, "Angels, check it out. I'm making me a Melissa." And they're like, "Wow, God, you've never made anything like that before." And he said, "No, Melissa's different. Melissa's different than anything I've ever made before. And the way she sees the world and responds to the world is going to be different than anything I've ever made before." And he thought about your favorite food and your favorite color and your favorite animal. And he says, "This is good." He says, "Melissa, I love you. I love you so much. Everything about you matters to me. Everything. The things that bring you happiness and joy, but also the things that bring you sorrow and pain, it all matters to me. And Melissa, it's my hope for you, as it is for everyone, that when I put you in the world, that you have two parents that tell you every day how much you matter to me." Now, some parents, they do their job really well, and other parents not so much. And then some parents aren't around, and then sometimes bad people do bad things to good kids. And Melissa, the world's going to come along and say, "You don't look right. You don't sound right. You don't live here. You don't own these things. You haven't had this education, and you don't have all the stuff." And every day, thousands of messages will bombard you and make you feel like you're not good enough. And it might get really hard for you to hear my voice and to remember how much you matter to me. But Melissa, I want you to know that every moment of every day, I'm right by your side. No matter where you go, and no matter what you do, I will never abandon you. And Melissa, I also want you to know that I'll never be disappointed in you. Now, I might be disappointed in some things that you say, or some things that you do, or even some things that you think about. But I will never be disappointed in who you are, because you, Melissa, are exactly the way I created you to be. And I am your biggest cheerleader. And I'm looking forward to seeing you again someday and welcoming you home and giving you a great big hug. And I hope you remember that every day for the rest of your life. Amen?
Amen.
Amen.
And so
Love
that, when you think about identity abuse, this is what God designed you, who you are. Identity abuse damages your perception of what God has designed you for. So the second thing, so that's the understanding your identity. You have a valuable identity. The second thing is evil always lies. And so I was thinking about, I'm going to be doing an online challenge called Crushing Self-Doubt, and I was going to call it Crusher's Inner Critic. But then I realized that, it's not an inner critic, because when we talk about inner critic, we talk about, I need to fix me. What I realize is that's the enemy.
Yeah.
It's the enemy. So the inner critic is actually the enemy whispering things to you. And when we realize that, then we can fight more effectively, because we can fight against the enemy. So when people say, "Well, how do I fight my inner critic?" You say, "Get behind me."
Yeah.
Just get behind me. And so the second true story I want to tell is right before I was ordained, I went through this self-discovery time, and God discovery time, where I would isolate myself every Friday on this hill. And I would pray and worship, and I would put like elevation worship or Bethel worship or whatever in my ears. I would sing on the top of this hill to the top of my lungs, and I would dance because nobody could see me or hear me. And I would celebrate my relationship with God. And what I realized was that this was just a profound, intimate time with Him. But right before I got ordained, I was really insecure, thinking, I was supposed to be filled with the Holy Spirit. I was supposed to have like this, ta-da, halo. Where's my halo? I don't get it. I look at me and I'm like, I'm just me. I don't understand this. And so I go up on this hill and I'm like, I can't go get ordained in front of hundreds of people and claim to be filled with the Spirit, knowing it's just me. And I got on my knees and I said, I go, "Fill me." And I'm thinking, okay, because I didn't know what else to say. And in that moment, I kid you not, so Jesus appears, and He holds out His hand to me, and He says, "Let's go play."
Wow.
And His eyes are just like sparkling crystals, and His smile is like this little kid, and every strand of His hair is like light, and it's just like, "Let's go play." And I'm like, yeah, I don't think I can do that. But I didn't say that, but I'm just thinking and so I look over here to God, thinking God's going to get me out of this mess, right? Because God knows I can't go do that. And then these little trunks appear with like all my junk in it. And it's like, okay, God, I got junk. Can you explain to Him why I can't go do it now? But I'm not actually saying this. This is like all happens like in 12 seconds worth of time, right? I look over here to the face of God, and I just see His face, and it's completely blank. And He says, "I don't look at that anymore." And He paid the price so I don't have to. And I'm like, oh, okay. Now, intellectually, I knew these things, right?
Right.
But here I am, and Jesus is like, let's go play. And God's like, what's the problem? God's like, I got better things to do with my life than sit around and look at your junk. Quit trying to show it to me. so I get up and I'm like, if that, so I literally say, if that's true, like God's gonna lie to me, right? I said, if that's true and you will never shame me again, then I'm all in 100%. Everything that I ever learned, heard, understood, perceived, read about who Jesus is and what he did and who you are, I'm going to believe. And instantly, I heard the enemy right here. He says, you're going to look like a fool. And I felt this like old drape of like shame and intimidation and self-doubt and all of that. I could just feel it creeping back up. And I went, wait, no. And I said, that's the old me and I'm not going back. And I walked off that hill, got down to my car. Actually, I called my friend. I'm like, do you have any idea how much God loves you? You know, all I got was her. This is like in the time of answering machines, right? And I got her answering machine. I go, like, this has got to sound like really retarded, but maybe like you just need to know that God loves you. But I know you know God. I'm going to hang up now. You know? So I go down the hill and I get in my car. And so walking up the hill takes about 15 minutes. I was there doing that for maybe like, you know, the prayer itself lasted for like 12 seconds. I mean, Jesus goes, let's go play. God goes, I don't see the problem. I'm like, oh, okay. And 4 hours had gone by. And I'm like, okay, what just happened? And I have spent the time, so this is in 2012. I feel bad for all of my clients and all of my parishioners prior to 2012, because I like didn't grasp my forgiveness. I mean, there was so much that I didn't grasp until that moment in time. And the enemy showed me his hand that day. He says, you're going to look like a fool. So every time I go, oh my gosh, I'm so stupid, I go, oh, I'm going to lean in. The enemy's trying to stop me. And it showed me how much the enemy is a liar. So that's number 2. The enemy always lies. And then number 3, you can choose to believe truth even when it doesn't feel true. So a lot of people will talk about how, I've always felt this way. I can't perceive myself feeling any differently to believe something differently. It's very feeling based. And so I tell the story. So I want you to imagine that right now you get a text that says let's say you're like the leader of your church, okay, wherever that's at. And you get a text right now that says your church is on fire. And so you're like, hey, I got to get off this call, and you shut it down and you get up and you go get in your car. And then you get another text that says there's an elderly lady who like is the prayer warrior church is inside. And you're like driving there like crazy thinking, oh my gosh, I got to get there. And then you get another text that says one of the neighbors went in to get the lady out. And so you pull up, church is in ashes, and the little old lady comes walking up to you, and you're like, yay. And then the fireman comes up and says, but the neighbor died while getting the old lady out. So as you're listening to that story, what did your emotions do?
All over him.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah. And yet the whole thing was a lie from beginning to end. And yet your emotions are going to go with it. And so when you grasp that reality that my emotions cannot dictate what I behave like or what I believe, you can choose to believe things that may not feel true. Okay. Does that make sense to you guys?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So what I told Melissa this morning was that I don't want to like over inundate you with too much information, but those 3 points are like the most important points. You do have an identity that's valuable. I tell people to say, I am eternally and uniquely valuable to Almighty God. That's number 1. Number 2, the enemy lies always, 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 always. And the third is you could choose to believe truth even when it doesn't feel true. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So
one thing that, I grew up in the inner healing and deliverance ministry since 13. And one thing, like with the enemy always lies, that I found and would help people is he always lies, but he likes to talk in first person. So it's like, I'm so stupid. So that it's easier for us to think, oh, that's our inner critic. You know what I mean? And like almost like easier to receive it as our thought versus this voice out here. Because it's so much easier, especially for somebody it's like wired like me that really has not struggled with like the fear of man type of a thing. I've been more like rebel, like you're going to tell me I can't do it. It's easier for me to accept something if I think it's my own thought, because if it's my own thought, then it must be true, right? Or a personal truth, or whatever you want to call it. So it's kind of that, same concept. Instead of believing it's the inner critic, but realizing that this voice out here that's talking in first person to me is out here versus in here,
right?
To be able to combat it.
Absolutely.
That's interesting.
And then the other thing I was thinking while you were talking was the flip-flop. So you're like saying you can believe a truth even though it doesn't feel true, and then flip-flopping it all because it feels true doesn't make it a truth.
Right. Exactly.
Right. Yeah. Like, my husband struggled with sex addiction and pornography until he got set free. His amazing testimony on that. But had believed instead of, I have a sex and pornography issue, I am a sex addict.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? And you create an identity around it. I remember.
I have a visual for that. Can I share it?
Yeah, sure.
Perfect segue to this. All right. So this is, I am inadequate. I'm incompetent. I'm unacceptable. I'm unlovable. I'm easily forgettable. I'm afraid, and it just envelops you. It becomes who you are. It's your identity, right? But this is that. So that's the lie, and this is truth. I have a feeling of inadequacy, unlovableness, rejection, and when you can say, "I am having a feeling this moment right here," instead of just to be able to say it differently, I am having a feeling of rejection. I mean, I have to practice this.
Right. Yeah.
To be able to say, when I go, I can't. No, so I'm having a feeling like I can't. Mm-hmm. I can. I'm just having a feeling that I can. You can draw this on a napkin. I tell you, it sets people free all the time.
It is so good because that also is empowering of something that I can actually choose or have control over.
Right. And this moment right there is the split seconds of choice of I'm going to either own it as who I am, or I'm going to say I have a feeling. Gives you that option to say, how am I going to interact with that emotion?
Yeah. When I was from high school, which started from my cheer coach on through my 20s, early 30s, I think is when I finally got set free. I had been in anorexic, hospitalized for it, and looks like we lost Heather, and bulimic. And, my mother made me go to counseling and all this stuff. And this was, eons ago. And the counselor at the time had told me basically, once an anorexic, always an anorexic type of a thing. Like you are always going to have to fight with this.
Yeah, and that's the same as that went with the narcissist. And so even like, so I know that Ray wanted to kind of talk about the whole addiction thing. There's who you are, and then there's how you're coping.
Yeah.
And just because you're coping in a poor way doesn't mean that that identifies you. So that's right. Like even saying, I'm a garbage man, so therefore I'm affiliated with garbage, and that means that I'm part of the garbage. It's not true. It's not.
Yeah. I had to get that mindset of no, that I'm part of that rebel in me. I'm like, no, I am not going to be fighting this the rest of my life, and had to develop that on my own. Yeah, I understand that, when stress happens, this is my coping mechanism, but I can fight that, and overcome that and not make that a part of, myself. I'm going to write your little drawing because I think that is like profound.
One of the things that I hear a lot is people who say, I need to stay in the program forever. And I tell people, don't get married to the program. The program is a tool. It's a tool to help you become who you were meant to be. Now, there's nothing wrong with getting tune-ups or having a mentor or having check-in, but it's not the program. The program does not define you. And to be able to work the program as a tool outside of the existence of self, because then you just end up replacing one addiction with another. So, so Heather, I know you're like hopping in here quickly on your lunch break. Did you have any other questions or insights?
I'm sorry, I had to log off because my audio went down. So yeah, I don't know what was asked, but I was going to ask how this manifests. How does it show up in a person's life? Can you elaborate more on that?
Yeah, so I actually wrote some of these down just so that I could kind of cover a broader base of them. So the one the way that it displays most frequently is self-doubt. So self-doubt can be shown in a wide variety of ways. It's kind of like the umbrella. And then there's an inability to receive truth. And so that's the second thing that I focus on the most, is this inability to receive what is really true about me. But then there's addictions. And I know that I believe Ray was going to talk some about it. So that can be food, drugs, alcohol, hobbies, sex, shopping, self-harm, hoarding. So any kind of addiction. And I really want those of you who've ever struggled with this will understand this. When you're sober and not acting on your addiction, there's a feeling that you don't like. And whatever that thing is that you participate in makes you feel better. It can make you even feel worse, but it makes you feel differently than how you are when you're not doing it. So it's actually what I call emotional displacement. So the feeling that I have when I'm clean, sober, or not acting out is a feeling that I'm trying to get away from. And so I will do self-harm. I will go shopping. I'll go eat, whatever's the easy accessible thing, which is why pornography is so bad right now, because it's so easily accessible. It's an easy way to change how I feel. And then there's violence and aggression. If you don't know how to handle what's happening inside of you, and then you'll actually try to go improve yourself, or so there's a lot of violence and aggression. That's a whole nother story. Isolation. So I'm not good enough, so therefore I probably shouldn't engage in that. And so therefore I spend a lot of time by myself. Chronic shyness. I tell people there's no such thing. It's a learned behavior. It's a perception of I'm not good enough or capable enough, or, there's a fear involved in that. Anxiety, depression, obsessions and compulsions. So I do this thing because it just like, if I don't do this, I don't like the feeling I'm having. So again, a lot of emotional displacement. So yeah, that covers a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Go ahead, Ray.
No, I was just gonna say, like, when you think about it, like, I mean, it just, most people, we've been raised, especially I think this generation or like the younger generations of today, like we've been raised in a culture to avoid pain. And like when that pain is like just the normal for us, and then like the avoidance becomes the new normal, it's just so overwhelming to try and remove the things that like do make you feel good. So like that was just a brief like side note. But you can go ahead, Heather.
Yeah, no, it was so good. Everything you're saying, I mean, so many people can relate to this. I mean, like most people can relate. I think most people have endured identity abuse on some level. And so this is actually very close to home, because I'm actually right now working with someone that struggles with alcoholism. And she was saying to me just this weekend about it's when she doesn't have it, the alcohol, the fear of not having it is so great that her mind just starts obsessing and going through this loop. And I talked to her a lot about taking every thought captive, not conforming to the patterns of her old thought and all that. But, that's what made sense to me. But can you give us, Elaine, some tangible tools that someone can do to actually help that process, to take those thoughts captive? How do they do that?
So awareness is, like I always tell people, awareness is the first step in healing. So a lot of people are just going to have a whole lot of awareness today. And the one thing that I'm really glad that Ray picked up on that you're asking about is avoiding grieving. People avoid grieving. Yeah. And we do a horrible job in the United States on grieving well. And we just don't know how to do that. And so to sit with, what is it that you're grieving? What is it you're afraid of? What's your worst case scenario? People say, like, I don't want to be like a downer all the time. It's like, but what is your worst case scenario? If you don't get your alcohol, what is the worst case scenario? And then let's talk about that. And then how do we grieve what that would look like and what that would mean? And because there's some underlying something. And so I had an interview a couple weeks back, and one of the ladies on the call said something, and I said, okay, what is the worst thought you have about yourself right now? So if you guys think about that, you don't have to say it out loud, but what is the worst thought you have about yourself right now? Now, and I gave him a few seconds to think about that. And then it's, when was the first time you ever remember thinking that about yourself? That's where the healing needs to happen. Whatever that scenario was, whatever that moment was, that's where healing needs to start. And then to be able to grieve that well. So I tell people to write your emotions out. If you're just like you're flooding with emotions, write out what you're feeling in words. I mean, write it down. I am feeling sad that I can't be who I think I should be. I mean, you write it down, because then you can process it. You can actually look at it and analytically process it. If it's all just emotions are just floating around, I just feel bad all the time, there's no processing going on. So yeah.
I learned about processing this last year in like a really amazing way, but a concept that I kind of brought into it was I learned about this type of writing that's called stream of consciousness. And when you take that idea of stream of consciousness, it's basically you take one thought and you don't allow yourself to filter what the next thought will be. Like, you don't try and keep it within a certain framework. So like a lot of how I actually walked out things for myself was that concept of like not maintaining a filter on it, but allowing yourself to actually write out continuously what is like, allowing yourself to go into those deep parts without like a filter, without any roadblocks, and being able to like really pursue the ideas that are in your head that you don't really that you have trouble fleshing out.
I've had clients who've had offenders, and what I would do is tell them to write a letter to their offender, and write it as though they're sitting in front of you in their complete right mind and they actually care about what you have to say. But then you just say it with all of the thought and pressure and power that you would want to say to them, but that they would receive it. So I said, use any language that you need to. You have to write it in pen, no erasing. And then they would bring it. And we're talking like 4 or 5 pages of, you made me feel this way, and then this happened, and now look at me here, and blah, blah, just let them let it out. And then I took them out into a field and I said, okay, I want you to read it out loud, but I want you to read it as though you're saying, and it was amazingly powerful to give voice to the pain and the power of authenticity in that moment, of being able to say, this is really how this makes me feel, and not feeling it like I have to spiritualize it or contain it into some fancy language that the church would approve of making me say.
Yep.
Elaine, one of the things I like to do, and it's similar to what you're talking about, I'd love to get your thoughts on it, is I like to use root cause analysis, which is something I've learned in the business world, but apply it in the spiritual context. So when you're working with someone that's struggling in these areas, to ask them, so they say something like, I'm afraid. Why are you afraid? Well, I'm afraid that if I take this risk, I'm going to look stupid. Why are you afraid of looking stupid? Well, then I'm going to feel like if then people will make fun of me and people will think I'm an idiot. What will happen if people will think you're an idiot? Well, then I won't have any friends. Well, what will happen if, what I'm saying? Like, you follow that all the way down. Like, what if you don't have friends? What will happen then? How will that feel? Well, then I'll feel rejected, and then so you kind of get to the root cause. That's not the best example, but getting to the root cause of what's underneath all those thought processes. And then, especially when you're working with a believer, and then being able to introduce truth, the truth of God's word at that bedrock level, at that root cause level of that, the fact of who they are in Christ, and that they're never rejected, what I'm saying? And just take out those lies, that root cause lie, and replace it with the truth.
Yes, and I think it's really good. I mean, obviously Heather makes it look simple, but it takes time. Why? Why? Because a lot of people say, I don't know why I feel that way, and I'll say, well, let's just sit with that for a little bit and think about that.
Yeah.
Why do you feel that way? And what the funnest thing I enjoy doing is watching people come up with their own realities when they're like, wow, because of this happened to me, that's why I feel this. And I had a client one time who was hyper focused on their appearance, like hyper focused on their appearance. And it went back to being bullied in 7th grade. And they're very mentally clear on that. And they're like, but I just don't know how to shake it. And it's important because I don't want to ever be ridiculed like that again. And then I just said, who do you want to believe that your looks are dictated by the junior hires, whom you will never see again, or that your value is dictated by God's love for you? I mean, is your sense of self and your value and your love and the way that you express yourself in life and how you believe about yourself dictated by some people that, you know, were immature on their own right, or by the truth of God? And really having those opportunities to just sit with that.
So good.
Really gives the Lord, the Holy Spirit, opportunity to speak more truth in a deeper way. Yeah.
Yeah.
So can you tell us again, before we go into Q&A with some of the people, there's a ton of comments going on. So I'm so thankful we have Kim over here going through the questions, because there is no way I can keep up with it. But kind of succinctly, so maybe their questions can be framed. Tell us again how you would define identity abuse and some of the ways that identity can be abused.
Okay, so identity abuse is when your self-perception is damaged by external sources. That's the simplest way I can put it. So your self-perception, what I believe about who I am, that belief has been damaged by an external source. Okay. And
can happen really from little childhood to where they might not even have a really good grasp of who they are without damage, correct?
Yes, because like in my story, what I realized was that my identity was abused before I was aware I had an identity. So I didn't have the mental capacity to say what I'm now believing about myself isn't true. Yeah. There was no ability, there was no information. I wasn't old enough to gain that information. And so I made a list. So verbal abuse, that includes sarcasm. So there's a lot of I want parents to be really careful about when they hear this. I want you to focus on yourself. Please don't replicate this with your children, but focus on yourself. Was anybody ever sarcastic to you, going, "Oh, you just think you're so smart, huh?" Or "You're such a dummy." Even just in joking and jest, those things are received at a very deep level, especially as a child. And if you look up the definition of sarcasm, it's intended to cause pain at someone else's cost. I mean, yeah, it's terrible. No sarcasm. So put downs, lies, both negative and exaggeration. So like my dad lied about me. Yeah. He didn't lie to me, but he lied about me. And then there's lies where people can say things about you that are so glorious, like everybody's a winner and then you grow up and you realize, you know, I was made to believe things that really aren't true about me. So that's where, so it's a whole nother story. And so I was going back to the early childhood thing. I remember when I was about 4 years old, asking my parents, where do baby worms come from? And I remember there being some sort of hesitation in the answer. And then they said, well, you know, they bite themselves on the tail and pull really hard, and then they become 2. And I'm like, oh, okay, I'm 4, right? Why not? And I remember my grandpa going fishing and pulling the worms apart, and they both moved. And I'm like, oh, okay, merrily I go on my way. I was seriously like well into adulthood before it dawned on me it wasn't true. I never had. I mean, who looks up where do baby worms come from anyway? There's no. It's not like on the news. I mean, you just don't get that information. And I remember thinking, wow, they could have lied about anything, and I would have believed it for a long time. So it's not an ignorance. It's an ignorance issue on my part where I'm not mature enough to know that they're lying, but it's not because I'm bad that I believe a lie. And so, yeah. And then physical abuse, obviously that kind of damage that, and then manipulation, that's a really, really big one. Abandonment, neglect. So that can be neglect in a marriage. It can be neglect as a child. It can be neglect by a boss. It could be, neglect anywhere where somebody's like just saying you're not valuable enough for my attention.
Yeah.
Sexual abuse. An interesting one is secondary trauma. And so as a therapist, I got a lot of secondary trauma. And so that can, you have to really attend to that. One of the things that is seeing violence. And that can be violence on TV or seeing I had a client who actually saw their sibling they're walking home from the 7-Eleven, I believe it was, and a car pulls up, grabs their sibling in the car and takes off. Sibling was kidnapped right in front of them.
Wow.
And then what happened to their family because of that, total disintegration. There was jail time. Even though it was a complete stranger, and the sibling was found about 4 days later in the back of somebody's car. The paper boy found them.
Wow.
Yeah, just unbelievable story. But that because that client was so young when that happened, it just messes you up. I mean, obviously it would mess you up. And then I had another client who had chronic fear for a long time, and I was frustrated because I couldn't figure out what. I mean, I consider myself pretty good at what I do, and I was frustrated. I'm like, okay, well, I got to figure this out. And I ended up hearing that this client actually had overheard their grandmother talking about surviving Auschwitz with a friend when they were like years old. So you can imagine when you're 5 and you're hearing your grandmother talk about this, and you can think, I can go to bed tonight, and people are going to come to my house and just like wake us all up and take us off, and then people are going to die. I mean, I can't imagine growing up with that fear.
Gosh.
And the overflow of that. And then spiritual abuse, I don't know if that needs explanation. And then, so any kind of violence or trauma, so that can be rape or experiencing war, watching war, participating in war. So yeah, all of it can come in a wide variety of ways, but it's anything that makes you feel differently about yourself other than what God would say is true about you.
So good. So good. So I would imagine, especially in this day and age, like the secondary abuse, children watching alcoholic parents, domestic violence.
I'm actually one of those people that had that, and that was a big thing that I had to walk through in counseling. Was I actually watched my mother lose my second sibling, and I was basically like handed off to a nurse, and they broke down the door and had to get my mom out. And I like watching all of that, and like had to walk through counseling with that, and had to walk through like all of the feelings attached to that. And surprisingly, a lot of those feelings led to the way that I expressed my sexuality, the way that like I ended up, participating in porn and having, certain addictions along the lines of sex addictions. And a lot of that had to do with this root of like a protective instinct toward women, because I couldn't do anything when that happened. And like it, so much, I have so many friends that have buried the fact that they watched, something in their life that was traumatic, or that were just simply afraid to allow themselves the idea that it was real. It's terrifying. And
there's a lot of statistics on child witnesses of domestic violence, and if you actually look up like professional papers on that, it's pretty bad. And it's actually against the law, I think, in the state of California, that if it's reportable for someone who's witnessing domestic violence, that if you're allowing your child to see domestic violence, that's actually like illegal in some fashion.
To where maybe like CPS can come in, step in, take the child. It's a form of abuse, secondary abuse. But I have somebody close to me who actually had witnessed her mom being very violently abused by 2 different men. Actually pulled one, as she got older, actually pulled one off of her mom, who was choking her to death or whatever. And then later on had to intervene with, her mom, who was then suicidal, and just being able to see, how that's affected her adult life and how she looks at everything, or, feels like she needs to literally protect everybody, and it's people don't think about really the secondary, in domestic violence, in alcoholism, in the children and how they're processing everything. Because I always say, like, children will hear, even if you think they're over their coloring, they are hearing everything that's going on. They are processing everything that's going on. as much as they can for their age. You know, they're not sitting there oblivious to what's going on. And
I talk to people about the fact that as an infant, you learn a lot. And by the age of 5 or 6, you've actually decided how relationships work. So as an infant, you learn, when I cry, how long does it take for someone to come and pick me up? Based on the steps that I hear coming, is this person going to help me or hurt me? I mean, just as an infant, you learn so much. And then as a toddler, you learn who to avoid, when to avoid, how to approach people. You know, you're just like, when somebody comes home at a certain time or smells a certain way, you know to avoid them. You learn so much so quickly, and those first years are just absorbing all this information. So yeah. So Heather, I want to give you a chance if you have any other questions before we run out of time.
Heather, do you have any more questions? We have to go.
Oh, I'm sorry. Did you call on me?
Yeah,
the audio keeps cutting out for some reason. No, well, one thing I was just going to ask is, what about kids watching video games that are violent? I mean, that's probably a whole nother show.
Yeah,
but,
I'm going to tell about, my son right now,
seeing violence. How does that impact kids?
I anytime that you're seeing violence, I was at my son's house the other day and I was playing with my granddaughter who's 6, and he turned on this video, and he's got one of those mega TVs, and she's sitting there playing a little game, and she looks up and you could just see her face, and I'm like, hey, why are you watching it? And he goes, do you think it's damaging her? Because, you know, I'm the therapist, right? I'm like, yeah, I do. And he goes, well, I don't. And I'm like, okay. And I said, come and sit next to me. And so we played a little game over on where she was at a view, but you could just see the distress in her face as she's watching these things go on. I mean, it's unreasonable to think that it doesn't impact them. That's just flat out unreasonable.
Yeah, I think in this day and age, we become inoculated to it as we get older. So then we forget to how it first impacted us when we were young. And I'll never forget. This is hilarious. I mean, now I can laugh at myself. But when I was, I don't know, I might have been like 10 or something. But the WWE or WWF or whatever, the wrestling beating each other up thing was just like birthed or whatever. And I was flipping through the channels, you know, and I see this we had this massive, you know, screen TV, and this guy picks up a folding chair and beats it over another guy's head. And I am in hysterics because I'm like, I can't believe, you know, I didn't realize that it was all made up or whatever. To me, I'm sitting here going, I cannot believe that this is where we've gone in the world, you know, and absolutely devastated. I am like praying in tongues. I'm in hysterics. My mom comes walking in like, what's going on? And I'm like, my words are all jumbled. I am that devastated, you know, that I'm watching this. And you know, and now I think about, you know, that because that was something I had never seen before. So it absolutely devastated me. And yet now they're becoming inoculated. I mean, little kids are playing, you know, war movies or war games or whatever at like 2 and 3 years old. And so by the time they're 10, where I was, they're completely inoculated to it. What is that doing, you know, inside? I know we don't have time to go into that today, but yeah, that, I mean, it impacted me that strongly. And so I'm like, well, what if we were to take all this away and these children weren't exposed to it? Would they have that dramatic, you know, what's going on? You know, it's so much more gory now too. So let me get to some of these questions.
I was going to say that.
Yeah, Jackie Martin wants to know if there's anything in the Christian world similar to dialectical behavior therapy, because that helped her.
Dialectical behavioral therapy in its own structure is not Christian nor unchristian. Because some of the tools that I use actually come out of dialect, because like the picture that I drew for you came out of dialectical behavioral therapy. And so it's not one of the things that I talk into non-Christian audiences as well, to let them know that there's specific techniques and things that you need to understand that are true about what you think and what you feel, regardless of your spirituality. So I brought these cards, but like I said, I didn't want to overwhelm people. Having to be able to separate what is an emotional issue versus what's a spiritual issue versus what's a mental issue. And the Board of Behavioral Sciences in the state of California is governed, our marriage and family therapists are governed by the Board of Behavioral Sciences, not mental health, not emotional health, but behavioral health. So they're if you behave well, they'll leave you alone. If you're not behaving well, they want to know, is it a mental issue or an emotional issue? And so a lot of what I deal with is the emotional issues that impact bad thinking. Okay. And so dialectical behavioral therapy is just techniques on how to think correctly. And so I think that I don't know that there's anything that's been modified specifically for Christians. So yeah, I don't know.
Okay. The next we have Jerry Bryan wants to know if there is a book that she can read about this identity abuse.
I did write a book. It does talk about that in brief in the back of the book, but I was gonna, like, the course that we were gonna drop at the end of this kind of overviews all of that and the steps that it takes to go through that. You can look up identityabuse.com. I believe it has an overview on it and does have a link to my book. But because honestly, that's a download from God.
Yeah.
So I'm like the only person trying to beat down the door of everybody saying, hey, identity abuse is the answer because God said so. And so my big, hairy, audacious goal is to make identity abuse known in the United States by the year 2025.
Awesome.
And that's why I tell people, repeat it, share it, talk about it, let people know that there's an answer.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Okay. Jackie Martin, would dissociative disorders fall under these categories of behaviors? So I'm guessing she's saying, like, if behaviors of identity abuse, do you see like DID happen in cases of identity abuse?
So yes, that DID, I see that I'd be very correlative, that when you have something that's happening to you that's so traumatic that you split completely off of who you really are, and you feel like you have to live in a different persona simply to survive the moment. So hopefully that answers that question.
Yeah.
Ray, did you have any questions for her?
I actually wanted to ask one of the ones that we had kind of written out beforehand, because I think it's so important. Just like, how can people start the journey of healing their identities? Like specifically, like I'm thinking, like, I walked through both going through like counseling and personally, like, just having the conviction of certain things that I knew were, lies or wrong things that were, like, I was trying to, like, battle out within myself and by myself, and just, like, letting it be between me and God. So I'm just thinking, like, practically, what could be useful, because I know that not everybody has, like, for me, I had, like, a very specifically spontaneous moment with God where he just kind of was like, we're going to break off porn. And it was just kind of like that. And, like, not everybody experiences that. Like, it's going to, some people have, like, long relapses, and it's just a constant in their lives. And so I just want to kind of ask for, like, practical steps for people moving out of that.
So the three things that I talked about at first, which is just awareness, understanding that I do have an identity, and believing that, and then understanding the enemy's lies, and deciding what to choose. Those are like mental things. Something else that I tell people is to practice the truth daily. What is true about you? Verbalize it. Say it out loud. I am eternally and uniquely valuable to Almighty God. And say that. When you know that and you think about that story, I am eternally and uniquely valuable to Almighty God. And you say that every day. So some of that is practicing truth. And then worship is extremely valuable. And what I teach people is how to worship God for who he is, not for what he has done.
Yeah.
And really learn how to worship him. And so I have a select song set that I have on my phone, so that when I go worship, I listen to those songs where I am speaking directly to God. I'm singing to him about how great he is, not about what he's done for me. And so, yeah. And then the other thing that I've done just specifically for this time of all these people in this era is my e-course, I collapse it all down and reduce the price dramatically so that people can access it. And it's all, so you can go through all 12 lessons. There's videos for every lesson. And I think we're going to drop the link in the comment section.
Yeah, I have. I sent it to Kim. So Kim's going to be putting in the comment section for everybody.
Yeah. And so, I mean, it like uber cheap. So like everybody can afford it, and it can walk you through that. And it gives you all, like everything that I'm talking about. It goes through step by step on walking yourself out of this trap of identity abuse.
That is so awesome.
Wow, that's awesome.
So good.
Yes.
Okay, guys, I'm looking at the feed. So if you have any questions, we've got a couple minutes left. Pop them in there. See, we've got Elaine, you will definitely have to go through the comment feed and just look at all the comments that aren't questions.
Okay.
There's a ton of them. It's so good, so affirming. It's really landing with so many people, which of course we know it will. And as people, watch the replay, I know a lot of people are working or having different things in the middle of the day, so they can't be on here live, but we have quite a few live, so that's really exciting.
I think I could have another question. So how would you suggest people walking through this issue with their loved ones that like are like, for the people that aren't experiencing this, but are aware enough to see that their loved ones are experiencing this, or that their loved ones are now aware of it and they're walking through it together? How would you suggest to them to support?
Honestly, if you could, gosh, I don't know. Because it's a deep issue, and because I have the therapy history and background, encouraging them to get help. Some people won't get help. Some people, their identities are so damaged that they'll refuse to get help. They're so convinced that they can't be freed that they will refuse to go get help, or that they'll be so afraid that the pain that they'll experience of getting help that they'll refuse to get help. So really encouraging them that there is an answer is really the best thing that you can do, to be able to say, you know what, there is an answer for this.
There's hope.
Yeah, absolutely. I have a little jar that says hope on the top, and I had a pastor do this to me one time. I went into his office and he goes, well, it looks like you've lost all hope. And I go, well, yeah, pretty much. And he opens up his jar and he goes, here, take one of these. And I picked it out, and they're little hearts, little paper hearts, and on them printed hope. And he says, when you've run out of hope, I'll let you borrow some of mine.
Aww.
And
that's so sweet.
Little piece of paper. I did that at a staff meeting one time, and I passed out these little pieces of paper that says, when you run out of hope, you can borrow some of mine. And people would tuck it inside their phone, or, and because a little bit of hope. Yeah. I said, just imagine, what would your life be like if this wasn't a problem? Yeah. And that little bit of hope that springs up in their mind is where all the leverage is. Absolutely.
Yeah.
So really quick, we have Maureen Cowley, and this is a deep question in 2 minutes. So, do you have experience with gender identity disorder?
I do. Yes. What's your short answer?
I know. Of course. So I'm really hoping, obviously, everybody one-on-one and doing your course and stuff like that. And I think there's going to be hundreds of women that are going to jump on this. If not even, if they don't even struggle to have the knowledge of what you can do, you know what I mean? And be able to speak to it, not in a therapist way, but encouraging others that they're seeing struggle with that, to go for this. But I really hope that in the future we can have some of your training brought into our ladies in the group and all that kind of good stuff. Because this is so good. I don't even want to end it.
Yes.
So good. So good. And you obviously have a book to write. So chop, Elaine. Come on.
The book is already written, and you can find the book. It's on, I thought I brought it up here with me, but my book is called Jesus is In, and it's you can find it on my website, identityabuse.com.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. We so appreciate
you,
your
Elaine.
time. This was so good. This was
Yeah,
so
I'm glad
good.
you enjoyed it.
Awesome.
Thanks for
Okay.
letting
So
me come.
much.
Have an amazing week, guys.
See you guys. Thanks for
you.
watching,
Bye-bye.
everybody.